The house was silent that night. Too silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you feel like you're drowning in it. I was sitting in my worn armchair by the window, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the streetlights flickered over an empty road. Another lonely evening, I thought. Another reminder that life had quietly slipped away from me while the world kept spinning without care. And then it happened. 3 sharp knocks at the door. Not the kind of timid knock you hear from a lost delivery man, but firm, deliberate, almost commanding. My heart skipped. At this hour? Midnight. I froze, staring at the door like it might open on its own. For years I had lived in this quiet neighborhood, and no one ever came to see me unannounced, let alone at this hour. My mind raced with questions. Had something happened to a neighbor? Was it the police? Or worse, someone with darker intentions? Another knock, slower this time. I forced myself to stand. My knees felt stiff, my breath shallow, but I couldn't ignore it. I reached the door, hand hovering over the lock, every instinct screaming at me not to open it. But then I heard a voice. A man's voice. Please open the door. Something about it made me hesitate. There was no anger, no malice. Just desperation. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door a crack. That's when I saw him. A man no older than 30 stood there. His clothes were travel-worn, his jacket frayed at the edges, and his face carried the kind of exhaustion you only see in someone who's been fighting invisible battles for years. His hair was damp from the mist outside, and his eyes, God, his eyes, they locked onto mine. And for a moment I felt like I was staring into a mirror of my own soul. Dark, heavy with secrets, filled with pain that words could never fully explain. You don't remember me, do you? He said softly. The words hit me like ice water down my spine. I gripped the door harder. I'm sorry, who are you? He didn't answer right away. He looked past me, into the dim hallway of my home, like he was searching for something. Or maybe for someone. His jaw tightened, and then he whispered, almost to himself. I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. Everything about him unsettled me. His voice trembled, but there was an intensity beneath it. A quiet fury. I thought of slamming the door, of locking it and pretending this never happened, but something in his gaze held me there. Look, I said cautiously. If you need help, I can call someone. The shelter, the police. No, he cut me off sharply. No police. No shelters. Just you. My throat went dry. Just me? I studied his face, desperately trying to place him. I'd seen thousands of faces over the years, from co-workers to neighbors to strangers on the bus. But his face that stirred something inside me. A shadow of a memory buried so deep I almost didn't recognize it. I swallowed hard. Why are you here? He took a step closer, and I instinctively gripped the doorframe, bracing myself. Because, he said, his voice breaking, I need to know why you left me. The world tilted. The floor seemed to vanish beneath my feet. What? He looked straight into my eyes, his own glistening with unshed tears. You're my mother. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Tea splashing across the tiles like blood from an old wound. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The silence of the house now felt like it was screaming, echoing his words over and over in my mind. You're my mother. I gripped the edge of the door, my nails digging into the wood, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. My lips trembled as I tried to form words, but nothing came. This couldn't be real. This man, this stranger, standing on my doorstep, calling me mother after 30 long years? But deep down, in the part of my soul I had spent decades trying to bury, I knew there was a truth here. A truth I had locked away in shame and silence. And now it had come knocking. My knees nearly gave way as I sank into the chair by the door, my mind spinning in chaos. The young man's words thundered in my skull. You're my mother. But before I could speak, before I could demand answers, memories I had buried deep, memories I had sworn never to revisit, came flooding back, pulling me 30 years into the past. I was 19 the first time I saw Richard Hayes. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make every head turn without saying a word. He had sharp blue eyes, a confident stride, and that careless smile of someone who had always gotten exactly what he wanted. I was just a small-town girl back then, studying literature, dreaming of becoming a teacher. My family wasn't wealthy, we scraped by, proud but ordinary. Richard, on the other hand, came from a family whose name was printed on buildings, whose money carved out power in every corner of the city. Our worlds weren't meant to collide, but they did. We met at the university library, of all places. I was carrying a stack of books too tall for me, and one slipped, crashing to the floor. He picked it up, flashing that grin, and for reasons I still don't understand, I let him sit with me. Hours passed like minutes. He listened intently, asked questions about my dreams, laughed at my awkward jokes. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, really seen. I didn't know it then, but Richard Hayes would become both my greatest joy and my deepest wound. Our relationship grew in secret. He insisted it was better that way. My parents wouldn't understand, he told me, brushing his hand over mine. And I believed him. After all, I wasn't from his world. But when we were together, none of that mattered. We walked by the river at night, whispering promises about a future where it would just be us. He told me he loved me, that I was the only one who truly understood him. I clung to those words. Every kiss, every stolen moment in the shadow of his powerful family, felt like proof that I mattered, that I was enough. Until the day I found out I was pregnant. I'll never forget the look on Richard's face when I told him. For a moment his eyes lit up. I thought he was happy. But then almost immediately his expression hardened. "We'll figure it out," he said quickly. "I'll take care of everything. Don't worry." He promised me we'd run away together if we had to. He swore we'd raise the baby as a family. I wanted to believe him. I had to. For weeks, I dreamed of holding my child in my arms, of building a life where love mattered more than money, more than power, more than his family's cold disapproval. But dreams can turn to nightmares in the blink of an eye. It happened one rainy afternoon. I had gone to meet Richard outside his family's estate. I thought he was finally ready to tell them about us. Instead, I was greeted by his father. A tall man with ice in his veins and steel in his voice. He looked me over like I was dirt clinging to his shoes. "You will leave my son alone," he said. No introduction, no pretense. Just command. I stammered, tried to explain that I was carrying Richard's child, but he cut me off with a single gesture of his hand. "Not anymore, you're not. That problem will be solved." I remember the ground spinning, my chest tightening. Richard would never. But then Richard appeared behind him. My Richard. My love. And he wouldn't meet my eyes. He didn't defend me. He didn't take my hand. He didn't even speak. His silence was the cruelest betrayal of all. The next weeks were a blur of threats and pressure. I was young, alone, and terrified. His family had money, lawyers, influence, and they used it all to suffocate me. They made sure I couldn't find work. They made sure my own family turned their backs on me out of fear of scandal. And then, when I was most vulnerable, they cornered me into signing papers I barely understood. Adoption papers. I cried, screamed, begged. But they made it clear. I had no choice. When the time came, I was allowed only one glance at my baby boy. One tiny, heartbreaking moment before he was taken from my arms. His cries still echo in my nightmares. They said it was for the best. That he would grow up in a better home. But I knew the truth. They wanted to erase me and him from Richard's life. And Richard? He let them. I never saw him again. Not Richard. Not my baby. I carried the weight of that day like a chain around my neck for 30 years. On the outside, I built a quiet life, working, surviving, existing. But inside, I was hollow. Every birthday, every holiday, I thought of the child I lost. I wondered if he hated me, if he thought I abandoned him, if he knew I loved him, even from a distance. And every time I passed a newspaper with Richard's smug, successful face printed on it, I felt rage burn inside me. He had everything: wealth, family, respect. And I had silence. Silence and regret. Now, sitting in my doorway, staring at the man who claimed to be my son, my hands trembled. Because as much as I wanted to deny it, as much as I wanted to believe this was some cruel trick, I saw the truth in his eyes. He had my eyes. And all the memories I had buried for 3 decades clawed their way to the surface, leaving me raw and exposed. The stranger, my son, looked at me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. And I knew in that moment that the past I thought I had buried was about to rise again. This time, it wouldn't end in silence. This time, there would be reckoning. For years, I lived like a shadow of myself. After they took my baby, after Richard let me fall alone into the abyss, I stopped believing in happy endings. Every day was a quiet performance. Wake up, go to work, smile when required, eat, sleep, repeat. On the outside, I was just another woman moving through the world. But inside, I was a ruin, carrying a grief that no one could see. I never told a soul about what had happened. Not my friends, not my family, not anyone. To them, I was simply Margaret, dependable, quiet, maybe a little too serious. They didn't know that every night, I lay awake, haunted by the sound of a baby's cries that only I could hear. They didn't know that every year on the same date, I lit a candle alone, whispering a happy birthday to a child who never knew me. They didn't know the fury that simmered inside me every time I saw Richard Hayes' name. Because Richard didn't just move on. No, he flourished. Within a few years, he became a prominent figure in business, then politics. His face was plastered on newspapers and television. He married into another wealthy family, cementing his empire. He had more children, legitimate children, children he was proud of, children he raised under his name. Every article praised him as a self-made man, a philanthropist, a family man. And every time I read those words, bow rose in my throat. Self-made? He was made from his father's fortune and my sacrifice. Philanthropist? He used charity events as stages to polish his image. Family man? He had thrown away his first family like trash. No one knew the truth. No one but me. And so I carried that truth in silence, my resentment growing heavier with each passing year. I tried to build a life. Truly I did. I found work as a teacher's aide, helping other people's children learn to read, to write, to dream. Each child I helped felt like a small bomb on my wound, but also a cruel reminder of what I had lost. I dated a few times, but it never worked out. I couldn't let anyone close. How could I explain the walls around my heart? How could I tell them that the best part of me had been stolen long ago? So I stayed alone. Alone with my books, my tea, and the quiet house that became my prison. Years slipped by like water through my fingers. My hair turned gray, my hands lined with age, and still, the hole in my heart never closed. But grief has a way of transforming over time. What began as sorrow hardened into something else. Rage. There were nights I would sit by the window, staring at the moon, and imagine Richard Hayes' face crumbling in fear. I fantasized about standing in front of him, telling him who I had become, what he had stolen, and watching his perfect world collapse. But fantasies were all they were. Because what power did I have? He had everything: money, status, family, reputation. I was just an aging woman with nothing to my name but bitterness. So I kept silent. I played the part of the quiet neighbor, the harmless co-worker, the woman no one thought twice about. But inside, I was a storm waiting for the right moment to break. And through it all, I wondered about him. My baby. Was he happy? Did he ever think of me? Did he know the truth? That I hadn't given him up willingly? That I had fought until I was crushed beneath the weight of Richard's family? Some nights I dreamed of him knocking on my door, just like he had. I dreamed of him calling me mother. Of forgiving me. Of letting me hold him again. Other nights, darker nights, I dreamed of him hating me. Of him spitting in my face, saying I had abandoned him. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. And now, after 3 decades of silence, the fantasy had become reality. He was here. The son I had lost. Standing in my doorway, looking at me with eyes that carried the weight of years I had missed. I wanted to collapse into his arms, to beg for forgiveness, to tell him I loved him even before he was born. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't just sorrow. It was anger. And I realized, with a cold twist in my chest, that maybe those dark dreams had been right. Maybe he did blame me. Maybe he hadn't come here for love. Maybe he had come here for answers. Or worse, for revenge. My voice trembled as I finally spoke. Who told you about me? He didn't answer right away. He studied me, like he was deciding if I was worthy of the truth. Finally, he said, "I've known for years that I was adopted. They never told me much, but I found records. Fragments. Pieces of a life someone tried to erase. And then I found him." My breath caught. "Richard." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Yes. I know everything about him. About what he did to you. About what he did to me." The weight of his words settled over me like a stone. The silence I had carried for 30 years had finally shattered. And now there was no turning back. For the first time in decades, I felt something stir in me that wasn't just grief or rage. It was possibility. Because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who wanted Richard Hayes to pay. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick with 30 years of unanswered questions. My throat felt raw, my hands trembling as if my body already knew what my heart refused to accept. Finally, I whispered, "Tell me." The young man, my son, took a deep breath, his shoulders stiffening like a soldier preparing for battle. He stepped inside, uninvited yet belonging in a way I could not deny. He sat down at my kitchen table, his gaze never leaving mine, and began to speak. "I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside," he said bitterly. "A big yard, expensive furniture, smiling photos on the wall. But none of that mattered. Not when the people inside treated me like I was nothing more than a mistake." My chest tightened. My adoptive parents weren't cruel in the obvious way. They didn't starve me or beat me. No, their cruelty was quieter, colder. They never let me forget that I wasn't theirs. I was always the outsider, the one who didn't belong. At birthdays, when they smiled for pictures, I was the one standing slightly apart. At Christmas, they gave their real son the best gifts, while I unwrapped socks or books with someone else's name scratched out on the cover. They didn't want me. They tolerated me. And I learned to live with that emptiness. His voice cracked, and I wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand, to tell him I would have given him the world if I could. But guilt sealed my lips. As I got older, he continued, the questions started to eat at me. Who were my real parents? Why didn't they want me? Why did I feel like half my story had been ripped away? When I turned 18, I started digging. I begged for records, searched through archives, hunted for scraps of information. Most of it was destroyed or sealed. Someone had made sure of that. Richard. His family. Of course. But I didn't stop, he said firmly. I found hospital records. A birth certificate with your name. Margaret. I said your name out loud 100 times before I even knew what you looked like. And then, he paused, eyes darkening. I found him. My stomach twisted. Richard. I whispered. He nodded. Richard Hayes. The great businessman. The family man. The philanthropist. The man whose smile was on magazine covers while I sat in my room wondering why my mother had abandoned me. I watched him from a distance. I studied him. I read everything I could about him. And the more I learned, the more I realized the truth. He didn't just abandon me. He erased me. He buried me like a dirty secret. Do you know what it feels like to see the man who gave you life pretending you don't exist? To see him hold his other children in his arms while you're left with nothing. Tears burned my eyes. My voice broke. I never wanted that. I never wanted to lose you. They forced me. I know. His tone softened, just for a moment. I know you weren't the one who left me. I know they ripped us apart. That's why I'm here. Not just to meet you. Not just to know where I came from. I'm here because he has to pay. The room felt heavier, charged with a dangerous energy. His words were knives, cutting through 30 years of silence. You suffered because of him, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. And so did I. He took everything from us. He had power, money, family, and he built it all on lies. On destroying us. I don't care about his empire. I don't care about his name. I want him to feel what we felt. I want him to know what it's like to lose everything. My breath caught. The rage I had buried for decades flickered to life again, burning hotter with every word he spoke. For so long, I thought I was alone in that pain, carrying it like a curse only I could bear. But now, sitting across from me, was proof that I wasn't alone. My son. My blood. And he carried the same fire in his heart. For the first time, I reached across the table. My hand trembled as I touched his. His skin was rough, hardened by years of struggle, but when his fingers tightened around mine, I felt something shift inside me. I thought I'd lost you forever, I whispered. Not a day has gone by that I didn't think of you. I wanted you. I loved you before I even held you. His jaw trembled, and for a moment the hardened mask slipped, revealing the wounded child beneath. I wanted to hate you, he admitted. I told myself you abandoned me. But when I found out the truth, when I saw what he did to you, I realized we're both his victims. We sat in silence, hands joined across the table, bound by pain and blood. And then, with a quiet fire in his eyes, he said, "We don't have to be victims anymore." In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about reunion. This wasn't just about healing old wounds. This was about justice. About retribution. About finally taking back what had been stolen. For 30 years, I had lived in silence. For 30 years, Richard Hayes had lived untouched, respected, admired. But now my son had come home. And together, we would make Richard Hayes remember the family he tried to erase. The night stretched on, shadows pooling across the kitchen floor as we sat at that small wooden table. My son, the child I had been forced to lose, the man he had become, had ripped open 30 years of silence, and now nothing would ever be the same. I should have felt relief, even joy, at finding him again. But what I felt was something far darker. A hunger. Not just for answers, not just for reconciliation. For justice. Richard Hayes had taken my son from me. He had stolen 3 decades of love, laughter, and motherhood. And now, here sat my son, scarred and hardened by a life that never should have been his. We weren't just mother and child. We were victims of the same man. And that made us allies. "I've been watching him," my son said, his voice low, deliberate. "He thinks no one sees him for what he truly is. The world calls him a family man, a generous leader. But I know what he is. And so do you." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the mug in front of me. He destroyed us to protect himself. He built his empire on our suffering. A long pause followed. Then his words struck like a match. "Then let's burn it down." The air thickened. My pulse quickened. For years, I had dreamed of Richard's downfall, but I had never spoken those dreams aloud. Now my son had given them form, made them real. I whispered, almost afraid of my own voice. "You mean revenge?" His eyes locked on mine. "No. Justice." The days that followed felt surreal. For the first time in decades, I wasn't alone. I woke each morning to the sound of another voice in the house, to the presence of someone who belonged to me. We talked for hours, about his childhood, about my stolen youth, about the hatred that had grown in both our hearts. Each story we shared only strengthened the bond between us. But more than that, it sharpened our purpose. Richard Hayes had lived untouchable for too long. And if he thought the past was buried, we would prove him wrong. My son was meticulous. He had already gathered scraps of information, newspaper clippings, financial records, rumors whispered in political corners. Together, we pieced them into a larger picture. We discovered shady business deals, backroom bribes, and charities that existed only to funnel money into Richard's pockets. He wore the mask of a savior, but beneath it was greed, corruption, and lies. "He hides behind his family," my son said bitterly one evening, spreading documents across my table. "His wife, his perfect children. They're his shield. If we expose him, we can't just go after his money. We have to destroy the image he's built." I traced my finger over Richard's photo in one of the articles, his smug smile staring back at me. He destroyed my family to protect his name. Now we destroy his name to protect ours. It wasn't simple vengeance we sought. It was total dismantling. Piece by piece, we would tear apart the empire Richard had built. Step 1, gather proof. We needed undeniable evidence, documents, witnesses, recordings. The world had to see the monster behind the mask. Step 2, infiltration. Richard lived in a fortress of power, but he thrived in public. Galas, speeches, fundraisers, all opportunities to get close, to watch, to wait for a crack in his armor. Step 3, confrontation. Not in private, not in whispers. No, Richard Hayes would fall in front of the world. The same way he had paraded his false perfection, we would parade his sins. At night, when the planning was done and the papers were put away, I often found myself staring at my son as he slept on the couch. His face, softened in rest, reminded me of the baby I once held for only a fleeting moment. Tears would sting my eyes. 30 years of love stolen. 30 years of memories stolen. But now, as much as it broke me, I also felt stronger than I ever had before. Because I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was part of something greater, a reckoning. One evening, as the storm of our plans grew darker, I faltered. What if we fail? I asked quietly. What if he crushes us the way he did before? My son looked at me with a fire I had never seen. He doesn't hold the power anymore. We do. Because we're the truth he can't erase. He erased you once. He erased me. But he can't erase both of us. Not this time. His words steadied me. For 30 years, I had carried silence like a shackle. But now silence was no longer my prison. It was my weapon. We stood together one night, staring out at the city lights in the distance, the city Richard Hayes claimed as his own. This isn't just about us anymore, my son said. It's about every lie he's told, every life he's crushed to keep his image intact. We're going to expose him. I nodded, my voice steady for the first time in years. We'll make him remember the family he threw away. And then we'll take everything from him, just like he took everything from us. For the first time in 30 years, I felt alive. Not because I had found my son, but because together we had found our purpose. The dark alliance had been forged. And Richard Hayes had no idea the storm that was coming for him. The first time I saw Richard Hayes in person after 30 years, my breath caught in my throat. He looked older, of course. The sharp lines of youth now carved into something harder, colder. His hair had thinned and turned silver, but he carried himself with the same arrogance I remembered from the night his father ordered me out of his life. And when he smiled, shaking hands with politicians and businessmen under the crystal chandeliers of the Hayes Foundation Gala, I felt sick. The world saw a noble man, a generous philanthropist. But I saw a predator in a tuxedo. And beside me, my son's hands curled into fists. We had chosen the gala carefully. Every year, Richard hosted it at a grand hotel downtown. A parade of wealth, power, and false benevolence. My son had managed to secure 2 tickets through a contact, and that night, for the first time in decades, I painted my lips, donned a black dress, and stepped back into Richard's world. The room glittered with champagne glasses and jeweled gowns, but all I felt was the burn of betrayal. My son leaned close and whispered, "He doesn't know we're here. Yet." It was true. We were ghosts, moving among the elite, unnoticed but watchful. For once, the secrecy was ours. And then, across the ballroom, Richard appeared. He stood at the center of it all, laughing, charming, his hand resting on his wife's arm. A woman with diamonds around her neck, and an expression that told me she had never known hunger, never known fear. 2 of his children stood nearby, tall, polished, glowing in the light of their father's empire. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Those should have been my memories. My family. My son should have been there, not standing in the shadows beside me, hardened by a life of rejection. I felt my son's grip on my arm. "Not yet," he whispered. "We're not here to explode. We're here to observe, to study him." I forced myself to breathe. But inside, every nerve screamed. We kept our distance, moving carefully through the crowd, listening to the conversations around us. Words of admiration for Richard. How generous he was, how brilliant, how devoted to family and country. Lies upon lies, dressed in silk and crystal. My son took notes quietly, memorizing names, faces, allies. Every person in this room was a piece of Richard's shield. At one point, Richard passed near us, only a few feet away. My chest constricted, my heart thundering so loud I was certain he could hear it. His eyes swept across the room, and for a brief second, I thought they landed on me. Recognition flickered, a shadow across his face. But then he turned away, shaking another hand, laughing, dismissing me as just another nameless guest. And that dismissal burned more than if he'd struck me. Later, as Richard gave a speech on stage about family values and building a better future, my son's nails dug into his glass so hard I feared it would shatter. How dare he? he hissed under his breath. How dare he stand up there and talk about family while we... I grabbed his hand, steadying him. Not tonight. If you strike too soon, he wins. Patience is what will destroy him. His eyes, so much like mine, blazed with fury. I've waited 30 years. I don't know how much longer I can. You'll wait, I said firmly. Because this isn't just about anger. It's about justice. And justice takes time. But fate is cruel, and restraint has limits. Toward the end of the night, Richard wandered toward the quieter halls behind the ballroom, phone pressed to his ear. My son saw him first, and before I could stop him, he followed. Wait, I hissed, rushing after him. We cornered Richard in a dim corridor lined with portraits of past benefactors. He hung up his phone, frowning at my son, then at me. For the first time, his eyes lingered. Recognition sparked, sharp and dangerous. Do I know you? He asked, his voice carrying that same polished charm, but beneath it unease. My son's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, words trembling on his lips. You should. You stole 30 years from me. Richard blinked, confused, then scoffed. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled my son back before he could say more, my own heart slamming against my ribs. Not here. Not like this. Richard's gaze narrowed, suspicion dawning, but before he could press, another guest approached, calling his name. With one last lingering look, Richard walked away. We stood frozen in the corridor, the air between us electric with rage and restraint. When we returned home, my son exploded. I should have told him. I should have looked him in the eye and made him admit what he did. No, I said firmly, though my own body trembled. If you confront him without proof, he'll deny everything. He'll turn it against us, just like he did before. We can't just shout the truth. We have to prove it. We have to ruin him where the world can see. My son paced, his hands in his hair, fury radiating from him. Finally, he collapsed into a chair, his voice hoarse. Then tell me how, Mother. Tell me how we destroy him. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt my lips curve into a cold, determined smile. We'll find the cracks in his empire. And when we do, we'll make him beg for mercy. But even as I said the words, a chill passed over me. Because I had seen it in Richard's eyes in that corridor. The flicker of recognition, the unease. He didn't know the truth yet. But he sensed something. And Richard Hayes was not a man who ignored threats. The storm was coming. But we weren't the only ones preparing for battle. The night after the gala, neither of us slept. Richard's face, smug on that stage, suspicious in that corridor, haunted me. My son's words echoed louder still. Tell me how we destroy him. So we began. Richard Hayes had built his fortune like a fortress, walls high and gleaming, but every fortress has cracks. My son had already unearthed fragments, donations that didn't add up, shell companies tied to his charities, whispers of bribed officials. For weeks, we pored over files, hacked into accounts with the help of one of my son's contacts, followed paper trails that Richard thought long buried. Every late night at the kitchen table brought us closer to the truth. And when the pieces came together, the picture was devastating. Millions of dollars laundered through charitable foundations. Politicians bribed to secure contracts. Properties bought under false names. Richard Hayes wasn't just a liar. He was a criminal. And now we had the proof. We leaked the first documents quietly, anonymously. A series of financial records sent to a hungry journalist who had long suspected corruption in Richard's circle. Within days, the headlines began to shift. Questions surround Hayes Foundation's finances. Too good to be true? Inside Richard Hayes' philanthropy. The public didn't turn on him right away. His PR team scrambled, releasing statements, calling it a misunderstanding. But the first seeds of doubt had been planted. For the first time, Richard's perfect mask had cracks. And we weren't finished. Next, we turned to his allies. At the gala, we'd listened, observed, memorized every face that toasted him. Now, one by one, we fed information to the right people. Whispers of Richard's dealings, hints of betrayal, seeds of mistrust. His allies began pulling back, distancing themselves. Invitations dried up. Handshakes grew colder. Richard Hayes, the golden boy of the city, was suddenly tainted. And I savored every moment of it. But it wasn't enough for my son. He wanted more. He wanted blood. One evening, he came home with fire in his eyes. He's hosting another fundraiser next week. This time, I won't just watch. I'm going to face him. My heart lurched. You can't. Not yet. If you confront him now, without the final blow, he'll bury us both. I don't care, he snapped, slamming his fists against the table. I want him to look me in the eye and know who I am. I want him to feel it. His pain was raw, and it cut me deeper than my own. So I made a choice. If you're going to face him, I said quietly, you won't do it alone. We dressed for war that night, not in armor but in determination. I wore black again, sharp and cold, the color of mourning the life stolen from me. My son wore a suit, his jaw set like stone. The fundraiser was another glittering event, cameras flashing, the city's elite laughing with champagne in hand. And there at the center stood Richard, untouchable. Until we arrived. My son moved first. He strode across the floor, straight toward Richard, his voice steady but booming enough to silence the room. Do you remember me? Richard froze. His smile faltered, confusion flashing across his face. Excuse me. You should. My son continued. I'm the son you threw away. The son you pretended didn't exist. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras swung toward them, recording every word. Richard's face hardened. Security, he barked, but my son didn't move. He stood tall, defiant, daring him to deny it. And then, I stepped forward. The crowd parted as I walked to Richard, my heels clicking against the marble floor. His eyes widened, recognition slamming into him. Margaret, he whispered, voice sharp with disbelief. Yes, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. Margaret. The woman you abandoned. The mother of the son you tried to erase. The life you stole so you could build this lie. The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing like lightning. Richard's mask was crumbling under the weight of truth. You think you can come here and destroy me? He spat, trying to regain control. After all these years? You're nothing. Both of you. Nothing. But he was wrong. Because even as he spoke, screens lit up around the room. The journalists we had contacted releasing every document, every proof of his corruption. Emails, bank statements, names of politicians he had bribed. The evidence was undeniable. And the world was watching. Richard's voice broke as he tried to shout over the storm, but no one listened. His allies stepped back, his wife's face drained of color, his children looked at him with horror. He had built his empire on lies. And now those lies lay scattered on the floor for all to see. My son's voice cut through the chaos, steady and cold. This is what you taught me, Father. To fight. To take what I deserve. You took my life from me. Now I'm taking yours. Richard's face twisted with rage, but it was over. Security didn't move to protect him. The police, already tipped off, were on their way. The empire of Richard Hayes had begun to collapse. And we were the ones who set the fire. As the crowd scattered, as Richard's name turned to ash, my son turned to me. His face was pale, his eyes burning with both triumph and sorrow. We did it, he whispered. I nodded, my own chest tight. Yes. But this is only the beginning. Revenge isn't clean. It leaves scars. He swallowed hard. And I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. No matter what we destroyed, we could never get back what we had lost. But still, in that moment, standing together as Richard Hayes crumbled before the world, I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years. Power. And for the first time, it belonged to us. The ballroom had collapsed into chaos. What had begun as Richard Hayes' triumph had turned into his ruin. Guests rushed out in whispers. Cameras flashed with merciless hunger. And the evidence we had unleashed spread like wildfire across every screen in the room. But Richard himself stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. His wife pulled her arm from his grasp, her diamonds glittering in the harsh light of betrayal. His children stared at him with wide, horrified eyes, as if they were seeing a stranger for the first time. For 30 years he had been untouchable. For 30 years he had walked above us, secure in his lies. And now, with every eye upon him, Richard Hayes was just a man drowning in the truth. The police arrived swiftly, weaving through the panic. Richard shouted, protested, claimed innocence, but the documents spoke louder than his words. They placed him in handcuffs, the steel clinking against his skin like the tolling of a final bell. "Do you know who I am?" he roared, his voice cracking. "I built this city. You can't do this to me." But the officers didn't flinch. They dragged him forward, his protest swallowed by the roar of reporters outside. And still, he turned his head toward us. Toward me. Toward the sun he had tried to erase. I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble floor. My son stood beside me, silent, his chest rising and falling like a storm barely contained. Richard's eyes met mine, wild with desperation. "Margaret," he hissed. "Please. You can't let this happen. We were young. It wasn't my choice. You don't understand." I cut him off with a cold, steady voice that carried the weight of 30 years. "I understand perfectly. You betrayed me. You abandoned him. You let your family tear us apart. And you stood there in silence while they destroyed everything we had. And then you lived your life, rich and proud, while we lived in shadows." Tears pricked my eyes, but my voice never wavered. This is not just justice. This is truth. And now the whole world knows it. My son stepped forward then, his eyes blazing with years of buried rage. "I spent my life wondering why I wasn't good enough," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought my mother didn't want me. I thought I was disposable. And all that time, you were here, parading yourself as a perfect father, while I was nothing more than a stain you tried to erase." Richard's face twisted, but he had no words left. His empire had collapsed. His family had turned from him. And now, the son he denied was staring him down, victorious. "You always taught people to fight for power," my son whispered. "So I did. And I took yours." As the officers pulled him toward the door, I leaned close, my voice sharp enough to cut. "Do you want to know the final cruelty, Richard? The empire you built, the life you cherished, it was destroyed not by enemies, not by rivals, but by the family you tried to erase, by the son you abandoned, by the woman you betrayed." His eyes widened, horror and fury twisting into one final, broken expression. And then he was gone, dragged out into the night, cameras flashing like lightning as the world consumed his downfall. Silence fell in the wake of his absence. My son and I stood together in the wreckage of Richard's world, the echoes of our revenge still vibrating in the air. We didn't speak for a long time. The weight of what we had done pressed down on us. The years of silence, the pain, the lies, now unleashed in one devastating storm. Finally, my son turned to me. His eyes were softer now, no longer just filled with rage, but with something deeper. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "I regret losing you. I regret the years we never had. But him? No. He deserved every moment of this." Tears slipped down his cheeks, and I reached up, cupping his face in my hands like I should have done 30 years ago. "You're not a mistake," I whispered. "You never were. You are my son. And nothing he did can ever change that." For the first time since I had met him, his lips trembled into a smile. A fragile one, but real. In the weeks that followed, Richard's empire collapsed entirely. His companies crumbled under investigation, his allies abandoned him, his name became a curse whispered in shame. He was no longer a king. He was a fallen man, rotting in the cell he deserved. As for us, life didn't magically heal. There were scars too deep for that. My son and I still carried years of loss between us. Years we could never reclaim. But we carried them together now. And every night, when I looked across the table and saw him there, not as a stranger, not as a ghost from the past, but as my son, I felt a flicker of peace. We had survived. We had avenged. And in the ashes of Richard Hayes' empire, we had found each other again. Revenge had not given me back the years I lost. It had not erased the pain, but it had given me something else, the power to stand, to speak, to finally be heard. And in the end, as I sat with my son, I realized the greatest victory was not Richard's fall. It was that he could no longer silence us. We had taken back our voices. We had taken back our truth. We had taken back our family. And Richard Hayes would spend the rest of his life remembering the two people he tried to erase, the two who brought him to his knees.